You're listening to Remember When podcast, Wes Britton's audio entertainment interviews.
Well, hello, Dave. This is Wes Britton in my undisclosed location again. And tonight it's very appropriate that I'm in an undisclosed location because I'm about to talk with Todd Goldberg, who has a number of claims to fame, and the most recent of which is the first novel in the novelization series for the very hot TV series, USA's Burn Notice. And since Burn Notice is going to be off the air for a little bit, I think many, many fans out there will appreciate the fact that they can get their fix of Burn Notice by checking out Todd's first book, which, ironically enough, is called Burn Notice to Fix. So let's find out a little bit about that. How you doing today, Todd?
I am doing fantastic. I'm hard at work today on the second Burn Notice novel. So pretty much while all of you people out there are fiending for new episodes, I'm sitting here making your dreams come true in my boxer shorts. Typing.
I'm not sure I want to visualize that.
I have the body of a writer, so you don't.
I know the feeling. Well, the first Burn Notice novel, The Fix, which just came out back in August of this year, of course, wasn't your first book. Why don't you tell the folks out there what novels and other books you've written before you got this contract?
Well, I've done 3 previous books. My first book was called Fake, Liar, Cheat, and that one came out in 2000. And it sort of was a good starter book for what I'm doing now, particularly with Burn Notice, because it was basically about a guy who gets conned out of his life. And it was sort of a light, kind of jaunty LA noir book that wasn't really very good, but people were buying it for the last 8 years, so I'm not going to besmirch their taste. And then I had a second book called Living Dead Girl, which came out a couple of years later, which was more of a dark and serious novel about a man whose wife disappears and he goes in search of her. And that was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. Another in a series of awards I've not won, but I've been offered
we get finalized.
And then my last previous book was a collection of stories called Simplify, which goes from everything from crime stories to surreal fiction and all points in between. So pretty much I've been a jack of all trades in terms of my fiction writing, in that I've always been captured by the dark side of life, certainly, and about crime and criminal behavior. But Burn Notice is the first book I've written that's really been strictly about almost, an investigative type novel.
He keeps using the word noir a lot. I always think of that in terms of TV shows and films of the 1960s with very stylized photography and all that sort of thing. How does that translate into literature?
Well, I think of it more in terms of sort of the novels like, Dashiell Hammett's novels or James M. Cain, or even more current novels like Scott Phillips' wonderful novel, The Ice Harvest, which I think is the best modern noir novel, where basically, you're dealing with someone who, if you were going up against that person, would probably be considered a bad guy, but in a world full of chaos is maybe the best choice around them. And so I think noir is a loose category in terms of what it invariably encompasses, but I think it's usually a bad guy with a bad woman involved with worse people, which sort of is what Burn Notice is. You think about Michael Weston outside of the TV show, and here's a guy who used to be a spy, and he goes around and he does things outside of the law, and occasionally he blows something up, or he does warrantless wiretapping. And so, in another world, he might be considered a villain. In the show, and certainly in the books, he's a reluctant hero.
Yeah, down his luck kind of hero. Well,
yeah.
Well, let's get to Burn Notice then. How did you get the contract to do these novels?
Well, I was sitting in my office,
in your boxer
doing
shorts.
nothing, writing a short story about depression, and my brother Lee Goldberg, who writes the Monk tie-in novels and also wrote Diagnosis Murder books and is a longtime television producer, called me and he said, hey, the folks at Penguin wanted to know if I'd be interested in doing the Burn Notice books. And I said that I wasn't, but I knew just the right guy. And he was right. I've known the creator of Burn Notice since college. We have a...
That would be Matt Nix, right?
Matt Nix, right. We have a very close mutual friend, And so I was a big fan of the show already, and it really appeals to my sense of humor and my sense of irony. And so Lee called me, and then I called my agent, and she called the publishers, and then I called Matt, and then we had lunch, and then I spent the next 68 days or so locked in my room, filled with caffeine and stimulants, typing. It was a very odd process to get a book deal, but it happened all within about a week's time.
Getting the contract. Did you write the book in 68 days?
I think I wrote the book in 64 physical days. I worked out a little calendar one day, because this is what you do when you are avoiding your deadline, is you actually you make calendars and you examine your work and that sort of thing.
Yeah, sounds very familiar.
I was asked to come on board at the end of November. I sat down with Matt the first week of December. I started writing the next week. I got sick for 2 weeks, where I sat around and complained that I was so sick I couldn't write. And then I turned the book in at the end of February. So I think all in, it was 64 actual physical days of work. And I think part of what happens when you write a book like The Fix is you want that sense of speed and action.
That's true.
And I think it exists on the page because I was writing it so damn fast.
It is a very fast-paced book. Well, of those 64 days, how many were spent in research? Because there's obviously an awful lot of research that went into that book.
I do research in tandem with the writing. What will happen is frequently I'll think, I'd like XYZ to happen. Well, specifically, there's a scene in the book where Michael's mother actually receives an envelope, and Michael thinks that it might be booby-trapped, that it might be a letter bomb. And I've always, when you see the news and someone gets a letter bomb, you think, oh, yeah, okay, a letter bomb. But I've never really understood how they work or what goes into it. I mean, most of the time, if I get a letter bomb, it's from Visa, and it's a metaphorical bomb. And so I wanted to go in and find out, well, if you thought something was a letter bomb, how would you open it up if you weren't the bomb squad? And so I stopped writing, and I went and I did that research. And before I started writing, I really gathered a lot of resources around me. I bought an entire shelf of spy books, basically, from Barnes & Noble. Well, actually, what happened is I went in one day to Barnes & Noble, and I said to the kid behind the counter, where do you keep your books about how to blow stuff up? And
warning, Will Robinson, warning.
Yeah, he looked at me like I was on crack, which clearly I was. And then he said, well, we keep some stuff in the back. And so he came out with all these books that they keep in the back of Barnes & Noble. So that was very cool. And then I made the mistake, however, of traveling across the country with about 5 of these books in my suitcase. And when I landed in New York, I live in California, when I landed in New York, my luggage was nowhere to be found. And it took them 2 days to get me my luggage back, and the books had been moved around with the luggage. And subsequent to that trip, I have not received my luggage on time in a cross-country trip a single time.
You've been burned.
There you go. I've been burned.
Well, hard as it may be to believe, I suspect there might be listeners out there who've never seen Burn Notice, which would astonish me because it's such a great hit, and the buzz has just been wonderful since it came out last year. Why don't you tell folks who may have never seen the show what's going on in Burn Notice?
Well, essentially, it's about a spy named Michael Weston who, one afternoon in Nigeria, as he's about to transfer a bunch of money to a warlord, gets a phone call that says, you've been blacklisted, you're out. And when a spy gets blacklisted or loses their job, it's not like they just pick up their gold watch at Human Resources and they walk out. They get their entire identity scrubbed. All the money that they had, all their contacts, everything is gone. They are literally persona non grata. And if you're in a foreign country when that happens, it's probably a more difficult task to get home. And so Michael gets sent back to Miami, where he is essentially kept as a prisoner in Miami as he tries to figure out who burnt him and why. He's been told by the FBI that he can't leave town. So that's the one place he can be. And while he's there, he meets up with his ex-girlfriend, Fiona, who was a bank robber and gun runner and jack of all bad trades for the IRA, and his old friend Sam Axe, a former Navy SEAL, who's been basically told to watch Michael for the FBI to make sure that he doesn't do anything bad. That's how basically the pilot starts. So as the series has gone on, Michael has tried to figure out who burned him, and what he's found out along the way is that his dossier has been falsified. He's been accused of doing things he never did, bad things. And so he's trying to figure out who burned him and why, who forged his dossier and why. And in the meantime, while he does that, he still has to eat. So he takes jobs helping people out of bad situations. So it's almost like a combination of Magnum P.I., The Equalizer, and Home Alone.
I hadn't thought of the last one.
And then, because he's at home, he has to deal with all these other issues. His mom lives there, and his mom's got issues, and his brother lives there, and his brother's sort of a grifter. So in addition to trying to figure out his own conspiracy story, and in addition to helping people out of their problems, he also has to go and mend fences with his mother and keep his brother out of trouble. So it's a complex family story mixed in with a complex conspiracy, and then a good investigative yarn each week.
Well, okay, what would you say what distinguishes this show, and how did you get those distinguishing characteristics into your books?
Well, I think the big thing is that it uses voiceover. We've seen voiceover a lot in crime shows back usually in the 80s and such, particularly when you think about Magnum P.I. or Spencer for Hire. They used a lot of voiceovers. But it was always a first-person voiceover where, Robert Urich would say, "As Hawk and I walked across the street, I realized that it was odd that I had a friend named Hawk," or whatever it might be. Here, though, in Burn Notice, the voiceover that is really, I think, the trademark of the show is that Michael is constantly giving advice on how to be a spy. Mm-hmm. So he'll be in a situation where he'll be sitting in a room, and there'll be the bad guy in front of him, and all he'll have is an issue of Cat Fancy in front of him, and he'll say, "When you're a spy, the best way to hit someone is not with your fist, because you'll break the little bones in your hand, but to roll up a magazine and use it like a knife." And so you get these practical, if you're faced with bad guys, practical instructions on how to be a spy, in addition to just being part of the show, of just being involved with the characters. And I think that's the key part that I had to translate from show to book, is to get that, and it's a very witty tone, the tone of these voiceovers about how to be a spy into a book and make it feel like it wasn't expositional, make sure that it was organic. And that was really, for me as a writer, the difficult aspect, because it's what the viewers of the show love, and I think it's what the readers of the book will either say, "Oh, I buy into it," or "I don't." And so that's the big thing. The other thing is that the show doesn't take itself too seriously. Yeah. It's very funny. It's sexy and violent also, but very few people die. There's not a lot of actual sex on the screen. And when the violence happens, it's proportionate. Michael hurts bad guys and people who have it coming, doesn't take out innocent people. And in a way, maybe it's like The Wire, when Omar Little says, it's all in the game. Omar only took out people that were in the game. He never went after civilians. And I think in Burn Notice, Michael Weston only hurts people who have it coming to them, people that are doing ill to other people.
What would readers of the book find that they won't see on the screen?
Well, there's a lot more words. I think the bit when the aliens show up is surprising.
Whoa. I read the book. There's no aliens, folks.
I think the gunfight at the OK Corral. I think you learn a lot more about the interior of Michael Weston. A television show, you are going to get a lot about a character by the way they look, by the way they act, but you never really get to know their thoughts. And writing fiction is really the only medium where you get to hear someone process information, understand their logic. And so I think what the book delivers is that entrance into his head a little bit more. So he's a bit of an anti-hero in the television show, and he remains that in the book as well. But I think the book begins to demystify why he is as he is. And the show has touched on some of this stuff as well, certainly, and that's where I get most of the information from talking to Matt and from watching the show and talking to the writers. He had a bad childhood. He had a bad father who was a difficult person to live with, and all that stuff in real life manifests itself in the things we think about all the time. I mean, who among us isn't constantly thinking about what a screwed up childhood they had and how that has affected them, on a daily basis. Michael Weston is no different. On the outside, he might be having a cool, calm exterior, but on the inside, he has to reason with the things that he has done and why. And so I've put that in. And I think there's a little bit more about the relationship between Michael and Fiona, which from the emails I've received from the fans of the show who've been reading the book, that's all they want. They basically want the books to be like a Harlequin, just Michael and Michael and Fee discussing their relationship and then blowing up buildings together.
Well, she does seem to excite him a lot more in the book than I've ever seen in the show.
Yeah, and that was sort of an intentional thing on my part because I'm very excited by Gabrielle Anwar.
I can understand that perfectly.
And I feel like Michael in the television show is probably excited by her quite a bit, but he has to keep that distance. He makes the choice not to involve her in his life too closely romantically because she can get hurt or she'll be disappointed and all those things. But I don't think that changes the essence of lust or the passion he feels for her or things of that nature. And so I feel like in order to be accurate with the character, how he would think, because we're spending 300-some pages in his head, that I had to address that sort of thing. In the second book, it's a little bit less, but I think in the first book where I really am setting up the franchise, it was important to do that.
One thing, too, that's in the book is we see a lot more of Sam, who is absolutely one of my favorite comic characters. I'm like you, I've always liked Bruce Campbell. But how did you decide to invest more time with Sam in the book?
I love Sam, and I love Bruce Campbell. I mean, he's fantastic. I was a kid who grew up on The Evil Dead, so to me, Bruce Campbell is like a father. Maybe better than my father, in fact. I think one of the things the show can't really do is show Sam talking to all of his buddies. One of the conceits of the show, for those people who haven't seen it very often, is that there will be a problem, and Michael will say to Sam, can you find out, the bank transaction history of so-and-so? And Sam will say, I've got a buddy at the FDIC, he'll take care of it. And then he comes back after the commercial and says, here's what my buddy got me. And so it's a little expositional hump that they can't do because it would take hours to show. But I love Sam and wanted to be in Sam's head and see him doing these investigative things because that's, I think, an element that I can do that the show can't. And so I thought, I'll show Sam's perspective every now and then and get inside of his head because he's also just a comic character.
Yeah, very quirky.
Very quirky, very funny, and I think when you have a character like him, a wild card character, it's fun to hear how they think. It's fun to spend some time with them alone. And again, it's an opportunity to do something a little bit different than what the show does. Because I think the books can't work necessarily in lockstep with the television show. It has to provide a little something different for the reader so they don't feel like they're just reading a script. They want to be on their own adventure. And so that was one thing that I did also to make it feel personal to me so that I felt like I had a little bit of ownership over what I was doing, that, okay, I'm doing something a little bit different. I'm being a part of Sam here, and that's something I can do that perhaps they can't afford to do or don't have the time to do on the show.
You mentioned getting emails earlier. What kind of responses have you gotten to the book so far?
I've gotten a ton of response, and overwhelmingly positive. Only a few people have said negative things, and invariably it's because the negative things are more fun to ruminate on because they typically come from people so outside the fringe of the world that it's hard to imagine them. People who can't separate themselves from the TV show, they think it's real.
Oh, Lord.
And, yeah, it's very surprising.
They probably live in Miami, too.
I think most of them live in a basement. I don't know where, but in the basement, and they're wearing a cape. I always imagine them wearing capes. But the positive things have always have a similar tenor, which is that I've really captured the voice of the show. That they enjoy the intricacy of the mystery this time around, and then it's fun to see their favorite players in action for a longer period of time. The complaints are always that that so and so could do it better, and could I give them the number to Matt Nix? They'd like to pitch their story idea to them, and It's tragic, really. And I've been chronicling some of the more bizarre emails and such on my website because it's just not something I'm used to. Normally, when I get hate mail from folks, it's for something far less interesting than Burn Notice.
Well, you said you were sitting there working on the second book, which is called The Endgame, right?
Correct.
Well, can you share anything about it since you're in process?
I can say that there will be someone with a problem who shows up in Miami, and Michael has to help them. It's going to be a little bit different. There's some things I'm going to do that the show really can't do, involving some things out on the water. There's a regatta race involved. Then, of course, the aliens land on about page 200, and Michael goes hand-to-hand combat style with the Martian Space Force. But, normally I don't like to tell too much about what I'm working on.
Sure.
When I'm working on it.
I thought I'd get some teasers out there.
It'll be a good time. That's all I can tell you.
Okay.
And all the favorite people are going to be in it. Mom, brother, Sam, Fiona. And one of the things that I enjoy doing in the books is bringing in characters also that people really like from the fringe of the show, like Barry, the money launderer, and Virgil, who's a favorite character, is showing up in this book also.
So where can folks find this book? Pretty much anywhere, can't they?
Anywhere that they sell fine mass-market paperback books. So all your bookstores, your airports, your Walmarts, your Targets, used bookstores, I'm sure we'll have a large, some of them very shortly. You can buy it anywhere.
They do turn around fast, don't they?
Yes, they do. And on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all those places. And I should say, though, that the second book is going to be coming out in February, and then the next book after that will come out in August. So the books are going to come out in quick succession, so people won't have to wait too long for them.
Okay, and you mentioned the website earlier. If people want to learn more about you and this book and your other books as well, where would that website be?
That would be toddgoldberg.com, and that's T-O-D, Goldberg. My mom decided that I should never have anyone spell my name correctly. She gave me just one D in my first name. And it's a yoke I've worn around my neck ever since.
And by the way, folks, in the interest of full disclosure, sometime this month there will be a print interview with Todd that's going to appear at my website, which is www.spywise.net, in which I ask a whole bunch of questions I didn't ask today. So you can pick up even more tidbits if you stop by spywise.net. And we'll keep plugging away for Burn Notice, and maybe you pick up some readers for some of your earlier books. And I guess the last question should be, do you have any other projects in the pipeline folks would like to know about?
I do. I've got a new short story collection that I believe will be coming out next fall. And then after I'm done with these 3 Burn Notice novels, I'll be working on another crime novel that's as yet unwritten and unthought of.
Okay. All right. Well, Todd, thanks for speaking to me today. I will now return you to your boxer short endeavors there so you quit stalling on your deadline.
Yes, I need to write the words, "When you're a spy," one more time.
Well, thanks again, and we'll toss it back to you, Dave.